This is GARIS Masculist MGTOW flyers, that is 2 3-page essays on the themes of masculism and MGTOW, written by and read aloud by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. This is flyer number 384, entitled Masculism has its William Lloyd Garrison, but not yet its John Brown. This is part 2, carrying straight on. When a culture is threatened with its very extinction, it usually goes to war to preserve itself. Responsible males, masculinist soldiers, will not tolerate that these fluffy feminist hypocrites indirectly wipe out whole populations, so will go to war to stop them. Just what form will this sex war take? I don't see whole armies of men fighting militarily against whole armies of women. That is not on the cards. But what I do see are guerrilla actions. For example, assassinations of the gender politicians who created these deeply misandrous gender laws in the first place. Mass shootings in the divorce courts. Mass demos of masculists pushing for the legislation of the para, that's paternity rejection right, etc. If the masculists are not listened to by society, and especially by the politicians, then I see thousands of feminazi divorce court lawyers and judges being murdered by masculist soldiers. I see an ideological war with monoconscious feminists who will be bitterly opposed by biconscious masculists, who will harangue these feminazi bigots with real hatred and venom, accusing them of being indirect genociders and hypocrites, making men's lives a misery. I see a much larger campaign by the masculists to put enormous moral pressure on women as a whole to FIP up, to help men create a FIP society, in which all girls are socialized by parents and educated by teachers and professors to be FIPs, to learn to pull their weight financially and not expect, fluffy style, to be able to parasite off the labor and money of a man. Masculists will be setting up masculist groups in every high school, every campus, pushing women to FIP up or pay a very heavy price, spat at by very angry, bitterly disapproving masculist students who will reject these fluffy parasites as vermin, to be wiped out, to have their fluffy parasite genes removed from the gene pool by being totally ignored, not even pumped and dumped, forcing them to rot on the shelf, utterly rejected by men and by society. It's in this larger sense that I see a sex war, an ideological war between very angry biconscious, brackets, that is, having had both their feminist and their masculist consciousnesses raised, close brackets, masculist and monoconscious feminists, who in their monoconscious ignorance suffer the delusion that gender oppression is a one-way street, whereas the masculists, in their biconscious awareness, that is, being aware of how each sex oppresses the other, and in fact that women's oppression of men is far worse, since it is continuous and lasts decades, in the form of women's manslavery, women's financial parasitism of men, women's many gender crimes against men that last decades, for example, paternity fraud, women's pill lying, then expecting men to pay for a kid he does not want, and not having the power to force the woman to either abort it or pay for it entirely with her own money. As men become increasingly masculist in their mentality and attitude towards women, the gender political war will heat up. I see myself as the historical equivalent of William Lloyd Garrison, that is, as the father of masculism, my term, coined in the early 70s when I was an avid male feminist, hoping that feminism would turn women into interesting creatures with whom I could share my intellectual interests in math and physics, but that barely happened. I've given this new ism most of its concepts and their labels. In brackets, have a look at 3 of my masculist flyers that are masculist glossaries, that is numbers 195, 196 and 377. William Lloyd Garrison used the media vehicle of the printed newspaper, which was the usual way to spread ideas in his time. I use the internet to do something similar. I've written nearly 400 masculist flyers, that is 2-3 page essays, on the themes of masculism and MGTOW, that's men going their own way, which shows a certain commitment to the masculist cause. But I'm not prepared to be a masculist John Brown martyr. That will have to be for some other brave soul. Personally, I think it's too soon for a masculist John Brown. William Lloyd Garrison published the first issue of his abolitionist newspaper, The Liberator, in 1831. John Brown carried out his raid in 1859, only 2 years before the US Civil War started, which he played a significant role in starting, because after his raid, the US South became alarmed that the Yankees up north felt so strongly about liberating the Negroes that they planned to raid a US federal armory and distribute some 100,000 muskets to the Negroes. This idea terrified the South, so it motivated them in a hurry to secede from the Union and set up their own country, the Confederate States of America, that is, the Confederacy. The northern states were horrified at this breakup of the Union, which then led to the Civil War. I feel that the maskers have yet to really push their main war horse, that is, the fight for the paternity rejection right. This fight will be as historically significant and full of passion as was the suffragette fight for the right to vote for women. Now that women can work, they must work. Anything else is manslavery, and manslavery is slavery. This core argument of the masculists will become known to everyone within the next few years as masculist ideas spread throughout the world, so that everyone is aware of them, has absorbed them into their personalities of both sexes, so that whole populations are conscious that men need liberating, but this liberation from manslavery will conflict deeply with most women's deeply ingrained attitude that
men exist on this earth to pay for women to have babies.
It's this attitude that the masculists are out to crush, telling the hated monoconscious fluffy feminists that they are manslavers, hated by the masculists, seen as immoral, parasitic, manslaving vermin to be wiped out. There'll be a lot of heat in this gender political debate as the masculists put powerful moral pressure on women to fip up. Men have the financial power to do this, since most men are already fips. Boys are socialized to be fips. Men evolve to be fips, so have the financial power to force women to be fips, and to punish women severely if they aren't. Men can simply ignore them, treating them as social pariahs, as rejectable vermin to be spat at and utterly rejected. The idea of being rejected by a strongly masculistic culture will terrify millions of women who will initially fight the push for the para using the feminist movement, but they will eventually lose, since when men unite behind the push for the para, women will have no choice. The cops are male. The law is ultimately backed up by male force, and the masculist ideas are undeniable in their moral persuasion. Now that women can work, they must work. Anything else is manslavery, and manslavery will get women killed, that is, killed slowly by being forced to rot on the shelf. So, I wonder how long it will take for the masculist movement's John Brown to manifest himself? ? It took 1859 minus 1831 equals 28 years, one generation, between the first abolitionist newspaper and the hanging of John Brown. When will the first masculist John Brown-like terrorist action take place? That is, some gender political action that society can clearly label as a masculist war action. For example, the arsoning of the family courts, or seeing them graffitied with slogans like "Crime Scene Against Men," or the first mass action of masculist soldiers in the divorce courts in a mass shooting of feminazi divorce lawyers and judges, followed by a press declaration by these masculist soldiers that they see themselves as masculist John Browns. Obviously, we are not there yet. Masculist consciousness is not yet sufficiently developed for some masculist John Brown gang to come out of the woodwork, but in a population of millions of people, there will inevitably be such people. Once the collective anger and hatred of men towards the fluffy feminist hypocrisy in the divorce courts and the feminazi opposition towards the legislation of the para becomes commonplace, there will be increasing talk of war, a sex war, of gender political murders seen as necessary in order to stop whole populations being wiped out by the short-sighted gender political myopia of the monoconscious feminazis. Once these gender political murders start taking place in non-negligible numbers, the politicians will get involved. The masculists will then be able to present their case to these politicians and to the media so that the masses can understand that monoconscious feminism is indirectly wiping out whole populations, that men need to be liberated from man's slavery, so that women need to be fipped up, and if not, then women will be punished. Society needs to be taught that gender oppression is not a one-way street, and that women in fact oppress men far worse than vice versa, because women have traditionally been manslavers, an institution that the masculists aim to destroy by destroying the hated feminazis, forcing them to become bi-conscious so that they see that it is a moral abomination to be a manslaver. How long before these masculist John Brown gangs become active? I doubt it will be as long as the 28 years taken with the abolitionists, given that everything moves along so much faster now with the influence of the internet, where ideas can travel across the globe at the speed of light. I would suspect that the above masculist ideas will be well known across the globe within a mere 5 years, so that the first masculist political actions will then soon follow. So if I were to place a bet on it, the first masculist John Brown will make himself known within a decade from now. Time will tell if I'm right. Cheers. Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. Prof. Hugo de Garis at yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. Author of the book Masculism, Men's Rebellion Against Being Manslaves to Women, and e-textbook of 380 plus masculist flyers for men's studies courses. Freely downloadable in Microsoft Word format from my website. Ciao.